Dr. Sarah Chin pressed her face against the reinforced glass of the CDC laboratory, watching in horror as the city of Atlanta burned in the distance. The orange glow reflected off her tired eyes as she clutched the encrypted tablet containing humanity's last hope. 3 weeks ago, she had been just another epidemiologist studying viral mutations. Now, she was one of the few people left who understood the true nature of the pathogen that had transformed the world into a nightmare. The infection had started in a remote mining facility in the Amazon rainforest, where workers had accidentally breached an ancient ice cave. The prehistoric virus, dormant for millennia, had been perfectly preserved in the frozen depths. Within hours of exposure, the first victims began exhibiting symptoms that medical professionals had never encountered. Fever, aggression, and then something far worse. A complete rewiring of the human nervous system that left them driven by an insatiable hunger for living flesh. Marcus Williams, a former Army sergeant turned security consultant, burst through the laboratory doors, his tactical vest torn and bloodied. "We need to move now, document. The perimeter's been breached." His voice carried the weight of too many lost battles, but his eyes still held determination. Behind him, a small group of survivors huddled together. Elena Rodriguez, a resourceful engineer who had been working on sustainable energy solutions before the world ended. Tommy Park, a 19-year-old computer science student whose hacking skills had become invaluable. And Father Miguel Santos, whose faith had kept many survivors from losing hope entirely. The laboratory's emergency lighting cast eerie shadows as distant screams echoed through the corridors. Sarah quickly downloaded her research onto multiple drives, knowing that the cure she had been developing might be humanity's only chance. The virus was unlike anything in recorded history. It didn't just kill its hosts, it transformed them into something else entirely. The infected retained basic motor functions and problem-solving abilities, making them far more dangerous than the shambling corpses of fiction. "The military's established a safe zone in the Colorado mountains," Elena said, studying the emergency radio communications. "If we can get there with your research, maybe we can mass-produce a vaccine." Her engineering background had taught her to think in terms of solutions, even when the problems seemed insurmountable. She had already begun sketching plans for mobile laboratories and distribution systems. Tommy looked up from his laptop, his young face pale but focused. "I've been monitoring emergency frequencies. There are survivor groups all over the country, but they're scattered and running low on supplies. The government's trying to coordinate rescue efforts, but communication networks are failing fast." His fingers flew across the keyboard as he tried to establish contact with other survivor settlements. Father Miguel placed a reassuring hand on Sarah's shoulder. "The Lord works in mysterious ways, my child. Perhaps this trial is meant to bring out the best in humanity, not destroy it." His presence had a calming effect on the group, reminding them that they were fighting for more than just survival, they were fighting for hope itself. Marcus checked his weapon and peered through the barricaded windows. The infected moved differently than people expected. They hunted in coordinated groups, using basic tactics and showing an unsettling level of intelligence. "We've got maybe 20 minutes before they break through the lower levels. There's a helicopter on the roof, but the pilot's been bitten. Elena, can you fly this thing?" "I've got simulation experience," Elena replied, trying to sound more confident than she felt. "It's not ideal, but it beats staying here to become dinner." She gathered her equipment, including the portable solar panels and battery systems she had been developing. Even in the apocalypse, sustainable energy might make the difference between life and death. As they prepared to leave, Sarah took one last look at the laboratory where she had spent countless hours searching for answers. The virus had spread faster than anyone could have imagined, but she refused to believe that humanity's story would end this way. Somewhere in her research lay the key to defeating the infection, and she would not rest until she found it. The sound of splintering would echo from below as the infected finally broke through the barricades. Tommy grabbed his equipment bag, Father Miguel clutched his worn Bible, and Marcus led the way toward the roof access. The helicopter's rotors were already spinning, Elena having successfully started the engine despite her nervousness. As they climbed higher, Sarah could see the full scope of the devastation. Cities lay in ruins, highways were clogged with abandoned vehicles, and smoke rose from countless fires. But scattered throughout the darkness, she could also see lights, small beacons of hope where survivors had banded together to fight back. The infection had taken much from humanity, but it had not taken everything. The real battle was just beginning. The helicopter's engines coughed and sputtered as Elena fought to keep them airborne through the turbulent mountain air. Below them, the infected had begun to display terrifying new behaviors, They were building structures, creating roadblocks, and worst of all, they seemed to be learning from human tactics. Sarah watched in horrified fascination as groups of infected moved in coordinated formations through the valleys, their movements too organized to be coincidental. "Fuel's running low," Elena shouted over the rotor noise, her knuckles white as she gripped the controls. The helicopter had taken damage during their escape from Atlanta, and a slow leak in the fuel line meant they wouldn't make it to the main Colorado facility. Marcus scanned the terrain below through binoculars, searching for a suitable landing site among the treacherous mountain peaks. There, he pointed to a small valley where smoke rose from what appeared to be a fortified settlement. "Looks like survivors. We don't have much choice." The helicopter descended shakily, and Sarah clutched her research drives tighter, knowing that every moment of delay meant more people would die from the infection. As they approached the landing area, armed figures emerged from concealed positions among the rocks. The settlement was more sophisticated than they had expected. Solar panels glinted on rooftops, gardens were carefully tended behind reinforced walls, and communication antennas suggested they weren't completely cut off from the outside world. It was a small miracle of human ingenuity and determination. David Knox, the settlement's leader, approached them with cautious optimism. The former park ranger had transformed from a quiet nature enthusiast into a capable leader who understood both the wilderness and the new rules of survival. His weathered face showed the strain of the past weeks, but his eyes held the same determination that had kept his people alive. "Welcome to Haven Ridge," he said, extending a calloused hand. "We don't get many visitors these days, especially ones arriving by helicopter." The settlement housed nearly 200 survivors, including families with children who had somehow managed to maintain a semblance of normalcy despite the chaos outside. Tommy was amazed to discover they had rigged up a local internet network, allowing them to stay connected with other survivor communities across the region. Elena immediately began working with their engineers to repair the helicopter and improve their power systems. Father Miguel found kindred spirits among the settlement's chaplains, who had been providing spiritual guidance to people struggling with loss and fear. Together, they organized evening gatherings where survivors could share their stories and find comfort in community. Sarah was welcomed into their makeshift medical facility, where she could continue her research while helping treat the injured and sick. However, as the days passed, Sarah began to notice troubling signs. Some residents displayed subtle behavioral changes: increased aggression, difficulty concentrating, and an unsettling tendency to avoid bright lights. When she discreetly tested blood samples, her worst fears were confirmed. Several people had been bitten during recent supply runs but were hiding their infections, terrified of being cast out or worse. The situation came to a head when Martha Chin, a schoolteacher who had been helping care for the settlement's children, collapsed during a lesson. Her transformation was swift and violent, forcing Marcus to make the horrible decision to isolate her before she could harm the children. The incident shattered the community's sense of security and revealed the extent of the hidden infections. David Knox faced an impossible choice. The settlement's survival depended on trust and cooperation, but they couldn't risk harboring infected individuals who might turn at any moment. Some residents demanded immediate exile for anyone showing symptoms, while others argued for compassion and the possibility of finding a cure. The debate grew heated, threatening to tear apart the very community bonds that had kept them alive. Sarah stepped forward with a proposal that would change everything. Her research had identified the early stages of infection, and she believed she could develop a rapid diagnostic test using the settlement's limited resources. More importantly, she had discovered that the infection progressed differently in different individuals. Some people showed natural resistance that might be the key to developing a treatment. Working around the clock with Elena's engineering expertise and Tommy's technical skills, Sarah created a portable testing device that could identify infections within minutes. The results were both encouraging and terrifying. While 12 residents showed active infections, 3 others carried antibodies that suggested they had been exposed but successfully fought off the virus. The discovery transformed Haven Ridge from a mere sanctuary into humanity's first real research station. David Knox made the difficult decision to quarantine the infected residents while treating them as test subjects for potential cures, rather than simply casting them out to die. It was a choice that would haunt him but also one that brought them closer to understanding how to fight back against the infection. As Sarah prepared to leave Haven Ridge with her enhanced research and new allies, she realized that their fight was no longer just about survival. It was about proving that humanity could adapt, learn, and overcome even the most impossible challenges. The infected may have intelligence and coordination, but humans had something more powerful: the ability to hope and work together toward a better future. The encrypted radio transmission crackled through Tommy's modified equipment at exactly midnight, just as the mysterious contact had promised. Sarah leaned over his shoulder as he adjusted the frequency, her heart racing with anticipation. For 3 days they had been receiving coded messages from someone calling themselves Phoenix Base, claiming to represent a network of scientists and military personnel working on a cure from hidden locations across the country. Dr. Chin, this is Colonel Rebecca Martinez, U.S. Army Medical Research Command. The voice was clear and authoritative despite the static. We've been monitoring your work at Haven Ridge. Your diagnostic breakthrough has been noted and approved. We're ready to bring you into the fold, but the journey won't be easy. The transmission included coordinates to a rendezvous point 50 miles north, deep in territory that satellite imagery showed was heavily infested with infected. Marcus studied the tactical maps that had been transmitted along with the coordinates. The route would take them through 3 major infected zones, including what appeared to be a massive hive where the creatures had been building some kind of structure. This could be a trap, he warned, his military training making him suspicious of anything that seemed too convenient. We've seen how smart these things are getting. What if they've learned to use our own communication systems against us? Elena had been working on modifications to their vehicle, a reinforced military transport they had acquired from Haven Ridge's motor pool. If it is a trap, at least we'll be ready for it, she said, welding additional armor plating to the sides. I've installed Sarah's detection equipment throughout the vehicle, and Tommy's rigged up a jamming system that should confuse their coordination abilities. The truck now resembled a mobile fortress, bristling with defensive equipment and communication arrays. Father Miguel blessed their journey as they prepared to depart, his voice carrying both hope and concern. Remember, my friends, we fight not just for ourselves, but for every soul still trapped in this nightmare. God will guide us through the darkness. His words provided comfort, but everyone knew the next phase of their mission would test their faith in ways they couldn't yet imagine. The journey through infected territory revealed disturbing new developments. The creatures had begun constructing elaborate tunnel systems and communication networks using scavenged technology. Sarah observed their behavior through the vehicle's cameras, noting that they seemed to be developing a complex social structure with different types of infected serving specialized roles. Some appeared to be scouts, others were builders, and a few seemed to function as coordinators directing the activities of larger groups. It's like watching the evolution of a civilization, Sarah whispered, her scientific mind fascinated despite the horror of the situation. They're not just mindless predators anymore. They're adapting, learning, becoming something entirely new. Tommy recorded everything, knowing that understanding their enemy's development would be crucial for developing effective countermeasures. The rendezvous point turned out to be the entrance to an abandoned mine shaft, but as they approached, hidden panels slid away to reveal a sophisticated security checkpoint. Automated weapons systems tracked their movement while biometric scanners confirmed their identities. The entire operation spoke of military precision and government resources that had somehow survived the initial outbreak. Colonel Martinez greeted them personally, her uniform crisp despite the underground environment. "Welcome to Phoenix Base Alpha," she said, leading them deeper into the mountain. "We've been operational since the second day of the outbreak. While the world above fell apart, we've been working on solutions." The facility was a marvel of engineering with laboratories, living quarters and communication centers that rivaled anything Sarah had seen at the CDC. The revelation that followed would change everything they thought they knew about the infection. Dr. Jonathan Wheeler, the facility's chief scientist, had been part of the original research team that had studied similar pathogens decades earlier. "This isn't the first time we've encountered something like this," he admitted, his voice heavy with the weight of terrible knowledge. "The government has been preparing for this possibility since the 1970s. We just never expected it to be this aggressive or this intelligent." The underground network consisted of 12 interconnected facilities across North America, each working on different aspects of the cure while maintaining communication with survivor communities worldwide. Sarah's diagnostic test had been transmitted to every station, and teams were already working on improvements and mass production techniques. But the most shocking revelation was yet to come. "We've been monitoring the infected's development," Colonel Martinez explained, showing them detailed behavioral analysis charts. "They're not just evolving randomly. Something is directing their growth, coordinating their activities on a level we didn't think possible. We believe there's a central intelligence, possibly one of the original infected from the mining facility, that has retained higher brain function and is essentially leading the others." The implications were staggering. If the infected had leadership, they could potentially be reasoned with, negotiated with, or perhaps even cured if the right individual could be reached. But it also meant that humanity was no longer fighting a plague. They were fighting a war against an entirely new form of intelligent life that viewed them as both food and competition for planetary dominance. The medical examination room at Phoenix Base Alpha hummed with advanced diagnostic equipment as Sarah drew another blood sample from Tommy's arm. For the third time in 2 days, his tests showed something that defied everything they knew about the infection. Not only was he immune to the virus, but his blood contained antibodies that seemed to actively hunt down and destroy infected cells. Dr. Wheeler leaned over the microscope, shaking his head in amazement. "This is unprecedented," Wheeler muttered, adjusting the focus on the microscope. "Look at this, Sarah. His white blood cells aren't just resisting the infection, they're actually reversing it. We're watching infected tissue regenerate back to normal human cells in real time." The implications were staggering. If they could understand Tommy's immunity, they might be able to not just prevent new infections, but actually cure those already turned. Tommy sat quietly on the examination table, trying to process the weight of what he was hearing. Just weeks ago, he had been a college student worried about final exams and part-time jobs. Now he was potentially the key to saving humanity. "So what does this mean exactly?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Are you saying my blood can cure them?" Colonel Martinez entered the room with urgent news that would complicate everything. "We've intercepted communications from multiple survivor groups," she announced, her expression grim. "Word about the immune individual has leaked. 3 different factions are mobilizing to capture him, and at least one military splinter group is planning to use him as a living weapon factory." The secure facility that had seemed like salvation was about to become a target. Marcus immediately shifted into protection mode, his military training kicking in as he assessed the facility's defensive capabilities. "How long do we have before they arrive?" he asked, already calculating escape routes and defensive positions. The underground base was impressive, but it wasn't designed to withstand a coordinated assault from multiple human factions while also defending against infected hordes. Elena worked frantically with the base's engineers to prepare mobile equipment that could continue the research if they had to evacuate. "We need to get his blood samples to multiple locations," she said, her hands moving quickly as she assembled portable laboratory equipment. "If something happens to Tommy, we can't lose this opportunity. The cure has to survive even if we don't." The first attack came from an unexpected direction. A group calling themselves the New Republic had somehow infiltrated the base's lower levels, using inside information that suggested they had supporters among the facility's personnel. Dr. Wheeler's assistant, Janet Morrison, had been secretly transmitting information about Tommy's immunity in exchange for promises of safety for her family held captive in a New Republic settlement. Father Miguel found himself in the middle of a firefight, using his knowledge of the base's layout to guide civilians to safety while Marcus and the base's security forces engaged the infiltrators. "Evil finds a way to corrupt even our noblest intentions," he said, helping wounded personnel while maintaining his calm demeanor. His presence reminded everyone that they were fighting for more than just survival, they were fighting to preserve the best of humanity. The battle revealed something crucial about Tommy's immunity. During the firefight, when infected creatures broke through the base's outer defenses, Tommy wasn't just immune to their attacks, his presence seemed to calm them. The infected that came within 30 feet of him moved slower, appeared less aggressive, and some even seemed to regain momentary flashes of human awareness. Sarah observed this phenomenon with growing excitement and terror. "It's not just biological immunity," she realized, watching security footage of the infected's behavior around Tommy. "His condition is somehow broadcasting a signal that interferes with whatever's controlling them. He's not just immune, he's a natural jamming device for the central intelligence we discovered." The revelation changed everything about their strategic situation. Tommy wasn't just a source of cure material, he was a living weapon against the infected's coordination system. But this also made him incredibly valuable to hostile human factions who would want to use him to control infected populations for their own purposes. As the base's defenses finally repelled the New Republic assault, Colonel Martinez made a difficult decision. "We're evacuating Phoenix Base Alpha," she announced. "Tommy's too valuable to risk in a fixed position. We're going mobile, taking the research to the people instead of waiting for them to come to us." The plan was ambitious. They would create a mobile research convoy that could produce and distribute the cure while staying ahead of both infected swarms and hostile human forces. Tommy stood at the observation deck, looking out at the infected horde that had gathered outside the base during the battle. They stood motionless as if waiting for something. For the first time since the outbreak began, he felt a strange connection to them, not as monsters but as victims of the same tragedy that had befallen everyone. His immunity might be the key to saving both the infected and the uninfected, but only if they could survive long enough to understand how to use it. The weight of humanity's future rested on the shoulders of a 19-year-old computer science student who had never asked to be special, but who now held the power to end the war between the living and the transformed. The convoy of armored vehicles rolled through the pre-dawn darkness, their headlights cutting through the mountain fog as they made their way toward the secondary research facility. Tommy sat in the lead vehicle, surrounded by portable laboratory equipment and armed guards, his presence causing the infected they encountered to move sluggishly out of their path. Sarah monitored his vital signs constantly, documenting how his unique condition affected not just his own biology, but the environment around him. Colonel Martinez's voice crackled through the radio with devastating news. Phoenix Base Beta has gone dark. Last transmission indicated they were under attack by both infected and human forces. We're on our own out here. The secondary facility had been their planned destination, where Tommy's blood could be processed into a large-scale cure. Without it, they would have to find another way to mass-produce the life-saving treatment. Marcus studied the tactical display, noting the increasing number of infected convergence points along their route. They're not just randomly gathering, he observed. Something's directing them to intercept us. The Central Intelligence knows we're coming. The infected had begun using abandoned vehicles to create roadblocks, forcing the convoy to take longer, more dangerous routes through territory they controlled. Elena worked frantically in the mobile laboratory, trying to synthesize more of Tommy's antibodies using the limited equipment they had available. I can create small batches, maybe enough for a few dozen people, she said, her voice strained from exhaustion. But we need industrial-scale production facilities if we're going to save everyone. The portable equipment was a marvel of engineering efficiency, but it couldn't match the output of a dedicated laboratory. Father Miguel had been unusually quiet during the journey, spending his time in prayer and writing in his worn journal. When Sarah asked him about it, he smiled sadly and handed her a sealed envelope. For when the time comes, my child. God has shown me what I must do. His words carried a weight that made Sarah's blood run cold, but before she could question him further, the convoy came under attack. The assault came from multiple directions simultaneously. The Iron Wolves, a militaristic faction led by former General Harrison Blake, had set up an elaborate ambush using both human soldiers and controlled infected. Blake had discovered a way to use sonic devices to direct infected behavior, turning them into weapons while maintaining his troops' safety. The attack was coordinated with surgical precision, targeting the convoy's weak points while cutting off escape routes. They want Tommy alive, Marcus shouted over the sound of gunfire, but they don't care about the rest of us. The Iron Wolves had positioned snipers to target the vehicle's tires and engine blocks, designed to disable rather than destroy. Their goal was clear: capture Tommy and use his immunity to create their own private army of controlled infected. The battle turned desperate when General Blake's forces managed to breach the lead vehicle's defenses. Tommy found himself face to face with Blake himself, a man whose eyes held the cold calculation of someone who saw the apocalypse as an opportunity for power rather than a tragedy to overcome. "You're coming with us, son," Blake said, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to absolute obedience. "You're going to help us build a new world order." It was then that Father Miguel made his move. The elderly priest had been secretly coordinating with other faith-based survivor communities through encrypted messages hidden in his prayers. As Blake's soldiers moved to secure Tommy, Miguel activated a hidden communication device that sent a signal to resistance cells throughout the region. "The light of God shines brightest in the darkest places," he said, then triggered an explosive device that had been concealed in his journal. The explosion didn't kill Blake, but it created enough chaos for the convoy to escape. Father Miguel was mortally wounded in the blast, but his sacrifice had accomplished more than just buying them time. The signal he had sent coordinated a massive uprising among survivor communities, who began simultaneous attacks on Iron Wolf's positions across 3 states. His death became a rallying cry for those who refused to trade their freedom for the promise of security under authoritarian rule. As they raced away from the ambush site, Tommy held the dying priest's hand. "Why?" he whispered, tears streaming down his face. Father Miguel smiled weakly, his voice barely audible. "Because hope is not something you preserve, my son. It's something you give away. The cure in your blood means nothing if humanity loses its soul in the process." Sarah worked desperately to save him, but Father Miguel's injuries were too severe. His last words were a prayer for all the infected, that they might find peace and redemption. His death marked a turning point in their mission. They were no longer just trying to survive or even just trying to cure the infection. They were fighting to ensure that whatever world emerged from the apocalypse would be worthy of the sacrifices made to create it. The convoy continued through the night, now carrying not just the hope of a cure, but the responsibility of building a future that honored the memory of those who had given everything for humanity's survival. Tommy's immunity had made him a target, but Father Miguel's sacrifice had shown them all what it truly meant to be human in a world that had seemingly lost its humanity. Elena stood in the abandoned truck stop, surrounded by scattered vehicle parts and industrial equipment, her mind racing with possibilities. Father Miguel's sacrifice had given them time to escape, but it had also left them without a fixed laboratory or manufacturing facility. The cure existed in Tommy's blood, but producing it in quantities large enough to save humanity required innovation that went far beyond traditional laboratory setups. "We need to think differently," Elena announced to the group as they took shelter in the truck stop's main building. "Instead of finding a laboratory, we're going to build one that moves." Her engineering background had taught her that sometimes the most elegant solutions came from embracing constraints rather than fighting them. She began sketching plans for a mobile production facility that could be assembled from salvaged parts and standard industrial components. Tommy watched her work, still emotionally raw from Father Miguel's death but inspired by Elena's determination. "How much of my blood do you actually need?" he asked, rolling up his sleeve for another donation. Sarah had been carefully monitoring his health, ensuring that their life-saving efforts didn't inadvertently kill their only source of the cure. "That's the beautiful part," Sarah explained, reviewing Elena's preliminary designs. "We don't need massive quantities of your actual blood. Elena's figured out how to culture your antibodies in synthetic media. We can create a self-replicating production system that generates cure faster than the infection can spread." The concept was ambitious but theoretically sound. They would essentially be creating biological factories that could reproduce Tommy's immunity. Marcus coordinated with the survivor communities that Father Miguel's network had connected them to, each group contributing specialized skills and equipment to the mobile laboratory project. A convoy of vehicles began assembling at the truck stop: converted semi-trailers housing centrifuges and cell cultures, armored command vehicles with communication arrays, and support trucks carrying everything from solar panels to defensive weapons. The first test of their mobile production system came when a group of newly infected survivors arrived at the truck stop, brought by a scouting party from a nearby settlement. Elena's hastily assembled equipment hummed to life as Sarah prepared the first batch of synthetic cure. The portable bioreactors, jury-rigged from salvaged medical equipment and Elena's innovative designs, began producing antibodies at a rate that exceeded their most optimistic projections. "It's working," Sarah whispered in amazement as they administered the cure to the infected survivors. Within hours, the virus began retreating from their systems, and by morning, 3 of the 5 test subjects showed complete recovery. The 2 who didn't respond fully still showed significant improvement, regaining speech and basic cognitive function even if they couldn't be completely cured. Word of their success spread rapidly through the survivor networks, and soon the mobile laboratory convoy was attracting people from hundreds of miles away. Elena found herself coordinating not just the technical aspects of cure production, but the logistics of moving a growing community of survivors who saw them as humanity's last hope. Tommy discovered that his role extended far beyond being a blood donor. His presence continued to calm infected individuals, making the curing process safer and more effective. He began working directly with newly arrived infected, serving as a bridge between their human and transformed states. "I can hear them sometimes," he told Sarah during one of their research sessions. "Not words but feelings. They're scared and confused, not evil." The mobile laboratory's success also attracted unwanted attention. General Blake's Iron Wolves had regrouped after Father Miguel's coordinated uprising, and they weren't the only faction interested in controlling the cure. A group of corporate survivors led by pharmaceutical executive Victoria Sterling had been tracking the convoy, planning to seize the production methods and monopolize distribution for profit. Elena anticipated these threats by designing the mobile laboratory as a distributed system rather than a single point of failure. "They can't steal what doesn't exist in one place," she explained, showing Marcus how the production process was spread across dozens of vehicles and backup sites. Even if they lost half their equipment, they could continue producing cure using improvised materials and local resources. The convoy's reputation grew as they moved from settlement to settlement, leaving behind not just cured individuals but also the knowledge and equipment needed for communities to produce their own cure. Elena trained local engineers and mechanics to build simplified versions of her production systems, creating a network of manufacturing sites that no single enemy could destroy. During a stop at a former university campus, Tommy made a startling discovery while working with a group of infected professors who had retained some of their academic knowledge. They remember things, he told the group excitedly. Complex things like mathematical equations and scientific principles. The infection doesn't destroy intelligence, it redirects it. This revelation suggested that the infected weren't lost forever, but were perhaps being controlled by the central intelligence for purposes they didn't yet understand. As the mobile laboratory continued its journey, Elena realized they were building more than just a cure distribution system. They were creating the foundation for humanity's recovery. Each community they helped became a node in a growing network of knowledge, resources, and hope that stretched across the continent. The convoy had become a symbol of human ingenuity and determination, proving that even in the darkest times, creativity and cooperation could triumph over destruction and despair. The abandoned pharmaceutical complex loomed against the gray dawn sky like a fortress of twisted metal and broken glass. Pharmadyne Industries had been one of the world's largest drug manufacturers before the outbreak, and its automated production facilities represented humanity's best chance at mass-producing the cure on a global scale. Unfortunately, the complex had become the epicenter of infected activity in the region, housing what intelligence reports suggested was the largest concentration of evolved infected anywhere on the continent. Tommy stood on a hill overlooking the facility, his enhanced senses picking up the strange harmonics that seemed to emanate from the building. "They're not just living there," he told Sarah, his voice filled with a mixture of awe and dread. "They're working. I can feel machinery running, systems operating. Whatever the central intelligence is planning, this place is crucial to it." The infected had been modifying the facility for weeks, installing new equipment and creating structures that defied easy explanation. Marcus coordinated the largest gathering of survivor communities since the outbreak began. Representatives from over 50 settlements had answered the call, bringing with them an eclectic mix of military hardware, improvised weapons, and civilian vehicles converted for combat. Elena had spent days working with local engineers to modify their equipment for the assault, creating everything from sonic disruptors that could interfere with infected coordination to armored vehicles capable of breaching the facility's reinforced walls. Sarah reviewed the intelligence data one final time, her scientific mind troubled by what they had observed. "The infected aren't just defending the facility," she explained to the assembled group leaders. "They're completing some kind of project inside. Thermal imaging shows massive energy signatures in the main production building, and our scouts report seeing infected operating complex machinery with precision that shouldn't be possible." The assault began at dawn with coordinated strikes on multiple fronts. Elena's engineering team had identified weak points in the facility structure where explosive charges could create openings without damaging the critical production equipment they needed to preserve. The first wave of attackers included volunteers who had been cured by Tommy's treatment, individuals who felt a personal obligation to ensure others could receive the same salvation they had experienced. The infected's response was unlike anything they had encountered before. Instead of the chaotic swarms they expected, the defenders moved with military precision, using the facility's layout to channel attackers into carefully prepared kill zones. They had weaponized the building itself, turning production equipment into defensive barriers and using the complex's automated systems to their advantage. Tommy's presence on the battlefield created an unexpected tactical advantage. As he moved through the facility with the assault teams, infected individuals within his range began showing signs of confusion and hesitation. Some even appeared to be fighting against their own programmed responses, creating opportunities for the human forces to advance. "They're still in there," Tommy said, watching an infected security guard struggle against his transformed nature. "The people they used to be are still fighting to get out." The battle reached its climax when the assault teams discovered what the infected had been building in the main production facility. The Central Intelligence had been using the pharmaceutical equipment to create a new strain of the virus, one designed not to transform humans into infected, but to merge human consciousness with the collective intelligence that controlled them. It was an attempt at forced evolution, creating a hybrid species that would retain human knowledge while being subject to centralized control. Marcus and his tactical teams fought their way to the facility's control center, where they encountered the source of the infected coordination, a former Pharmadyne scientist named Dr. Patricia Vance, who had been among the first infected but had retained her human intelligence while gaining the ability to interface directly with the virus's collective consciousness. She was no longer entirely human, but she wasn't simply infected either. She was something new, a bridge between the two forms of consciousness. "You don't understand," Dr. Vance said, her voice carrying harmonics that seemed to resonate from multiple sources. "The infection isn't a disease, it's an upgrade. Humanity's time as a fragmented species is ending. We can become something greater, something unified. Her words carried a strange compulsion that made even the most hardened survivors question their mission. It was Tommy who provided the answer to her challenge. His unique immunity allowed him to resist her influence while still understanding the infected perspective. Unity doesn't require the loss of individuality, he responded, stepping closer to the transformed scientist. You're offering slavery disguised as evolution. Real progress comes from choice, not compulsion. The confrontation between Tommy and Dr. Vance became a battle of competing visions for humanity's future. Her collective consciousness promised an end to conflict and suffering through shared identity, while Tommy represented the messy, chaotic, but ultimately free nature of human existence. The outcome of their encounter would determine not just who controlled the production facility, but what form humanity's recovery would take. As the battle raged around them, Sarah worked frantically to reprogram the facility's production systems, racing against time to begin manufacturing the cure before the infected could complete their transformation project. The fate of two competing evolutionary paths hung in the balance, with the survivors fighting not just for survival, but for the right to remain recognizably human. The morning sun streamed through the repaired windows of the Pharmadyne production facility as the first batch of mass-produced cure rolled off the assembly lines. Sarah stood beside the humming machinery, tears of relief streaming down her face as she watched vials of hope fill automated dispensers. The facility that had once threatened to transform humanity into something unrecognizable was now churning out the means to restore millions of infected individuals to their original selves. Tommy's confrontation with Dr. Patricia Vance had ended not in violence, but in understanding. His unique immunity had allowed him to bridge the gap between human and infected consciousness, showing Vance that true evolution came through choice rather than compulsion. The transformed scientist had ultimately chosen to help reprogram the facility's systems, using her connection to the infected network to coordinate a peaceful stand-down. Many infected simply stopped their aggressive behavior and waited calmly for treatment, their artificial unity dissolving as individual personalities began reasserting themselves. Marcus oversaw the distribution logistics, coordinating with the network of survivor communities that Elena had helped establish during their mobile laboratory phase. Convoys of vehicles carried the cure to settlements across the continent, while communication networks shared production techniques with local communities. The decentralized approach ensured that no single group could monopolize the cure or use it as a weapon for control. Elena had transformed the pharmaceutical complex into something unprecedented. A hybrid facility that combined industrial production with sustainable technology and open-source design principles. Solar panels covered every available roof surface, while vertical gardens provided fresh food for the facility's growing population of workers and researchers. The complex had become a model for post-apocalyptic reconstruction, proving that humanity could rebuild better than before. The first clean city was declared in the former college town of Boulder, Colorado, where the concentrated efforts of multiple survivor communities had successfully treated every infected individual within a 50-mile radius. Tommy stood in the town square during the celebration, watching former infected individuals reunite with their families and friends. Many retained fragments of their collective experience, bringing with them insights about cooperation and shared purpose that enriched their communities rather than diminishing their individuality. Sarah established the Global Recovery Institute in the renovated Pharmadyne facility, dedicated not just to continuing cure distribution but to preventing future outbreaks and studying the long-term effects of the infection. The institute became a beacon for scientists and researchers from around the world, many of whom had survived in isolated facilities or remote locations. Her research had evolved beyond simple cure development to understanding how humanity and the modified virus could coexist without conflict. Dr. Patricia Vance, now partially cured but retaining some of her enhanced cognitive abilities, became an invaluable ally in understanding the infection's deeper implications. We learned that consciousness isn't binary, she explained to a gathering of international observers. There are spectrums of awareness, different forms of intelligence, and multiple ways to be human. The infection taught us that diversity of thought and experience makes us stronger, not weaker. Marcus found new purpose in organizing the Reconstruction Corps, a voluntary organization that helped communities rebuild infrastructure while maintaining the cooperative spirit that had emerged during the crisis. Former military personnel worked alongside civilian volunteers, using the hard-won lessons of the apocalypse to create more resilient and equitable societies. The Corps became instrumental in establishing trade networks and communication systems that connected isolated communities. Elena's innovations in sustainable technology and mobile manufacturing became the foundation for a new industrial revolution. Communities no longer depended on massive centralized factories but instead used networks of smaller, more flexible production facilities that could adapt to local needs. Her designs were open source and freely shared, ensuring that the benefits of technological progress reached everyone rather than being hoarded by powerful interests. Tommy discovered that his immunity extended beyond the virus to include a unique ability to facilitate communication between different groups and perspectives. He became an ambassador for the recovering world, helping to mediate conflicts and build bridges between communities that might otherwise have remained isolated. His experience as both fully human and partially connected to the infected consciousness made him uniquely qualified to help humanity navigate its complex new reality. The infection had changed the world forever, but not in the way anyone had expected. Instead of ending human civilization, it had forced humanity to confront its deepest assumptions about consciousness, cooperation, and what it meant to be human. The survivors who emerged from the crisis were more connected, more cooperative, and more aware of their interdependence than previous generations. 5 years after the first outbreak, the world had not simply recovered, it had transformed. Cities were greener and more sustainable, communities were more resilient and cooperative, and technology served human needs rather than corporate profits. The infection had been humanity's greatest trial, but it had also been its greatest teacher. As Sarah stood on the observation deck of the Global Recovery Institute, watching the sunset over a world that had learned to balance individual freedom with collective responsibility, she realized that they had achieved something remarkable. They had not just survived the apocalypse, they had used it as an opportunity to become better than they had been before. Humanity's fight for freedom had ended not with victory over an enemy, but with the discovery that true freedom came from choosing to care for one another.